Tremors rock the ground beneath your feet. Something deep below has sensed your presence. It is relentless. It is hungry. Before you can even move, earth and stone erupts before you, and the last thing you see is the gaping maw of the bulette as it engulfs your entire body and drags you down into the darkness. Ahoy everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm Nazir North, and in this video we are examining the bulette from Dungeons & Dragons. We are going to go through the lore and mechanics of the bulette in the monster manual and talk about how you can use it as the dungeon master in your D&D campaign. We are also going to do a little homebrewing in this video, so stick around until the end to see my take on a stronger, more challenging version of the bulette that you could send up against higher level adventuring parties. Let's get started. The monster manual gives us a fair bit of lore about the bulette that can help us work out what their nature and behaviour is going to be like both in and out of combat. Out of the gate we are told that this is a predator, and that it is also sometimes called the land shark. Instantly this evokes an idea in our heads of how it behaves, stalking prey beneath the ground and striking upwards from the earth, like a shark breaking the surface of the water. If you've never seen the movie Tremors, I would definitely recommend watching that before you run your bulette to get an idea of how they're going to act. Another interesting thing the monster manual entry tells us in that opening paragraph is that the bulette fears no other creature and pays no mind to foes who outnumber it or appear stronger than it. It just attacks indiscriminately. As burrowing creatures, they do not care about the surrounding environment, leaving uprooted trees, landslides and sinkholes in their wake. At least that would make them easy to track. Although all of this evidence and trail of destruction left behind might make you think that a region is suffering from some kind of natural seismic disaster rather than being caused by a single ravenous creature. Although it's not stated, I think we can also safely assume here that the bulette would wreak havoc on building foundations, and could make whole villages structurally unsafe. The next section in the monster manual entry tells us a bit more about its movement and feeding habits. It prefers a temperate climate, but it has no lair. However, as juvenile bulettes are only very rarely observed, some believe that they do actually have hidden lairs and nests deep underground, but it's not really certain either way. While we're talking about life cycle, we also learn here that the bulette mating ritual is dangerous, with the male usually killed and eaten as part of the process, a bit like the practice of the praying mantis. And bulette cannibalism isn't just restricted to procreation. If bulette territories overlap, they will absolutely try to kill and eat each other. They are by nature solitary hunters, very unlikely to hunt in packs or cooperate on any level with other creatures, even others of their own kind. A bulette roams a territory around 30 miles wide, which is pretty big, and it will consume all food in that area before moving on and terrorizing some new area. And when it comes to food, it eats anything that moves. However, its favourite food is said to be plump halflings, and it specifically dislikes the taste of elves and dwarves. So even though it's not a picky eater, it clearly does have some dietary preferences. An interesting point to note here though, based on the artwork we have for the bulette in the 5th edition monster manual, is that it doesn't seem to have any teeth. Instead it has a sharp beak-like mouth. If we can follow the pattern of real-world animals, then this would tell me that even though the bulette might try and eat anything that moves, practically it's only really going to be able to consume things which are about the same size as it or smaller. So in D&D terms we are talking about creatures which are large in size or smaller than that. I have seen some bulette artwork that shows it with teeth, for example the artwork from 4th edition D&D. But overall, I don't know how canonically we should consider the artwork when looking at the description and the stat block all side by side. Let me know in the comments, the bulette, should it have teeth or a beak? The entry in the monster manual does tell us that some suspect it to be a magical hybrid of snapping turtles and armadillos. So there's one point in both camps there, one for beak and one for teeth. Let me know what you think. Ultimately, it's going to be up to you about how you implement them in your campaign, and really, does it matter too much whether they have teeth or a beak? Not very much, it's mainly just flavour. Anyway, that's about it for the lore on the Bulette from the Monster Manual. Let's have a look at the stat block. It is a large, unaligned monstrosity, no surprises there. This tells us that it is a big animal that's going to behave according to its nature and primal drives. Namely to eat and reproduce. It's not going to have any personal goals or objectives beyond that. It's got a natural armor class of 17 and a decent pool of hit points at nearly 100. It's challenge rating 5, and on the face of it, it seems like a tough monster. I won't lie, when that one pops up in Baldur's Gate 3, it wiped my party more times than I'd care to admit. However, we know from the Bulette's lore that it is solitary, so the party are only ever going to be attacked by one Bulette at a time, and it's very unlikely to be accompanied by any other creatures allied with it joining the fight too. So this actually gives the Bulette quite a narrow range and a cap in terms of gameplay tier where you'd see it involved in a fight. Let's assume we have a party of 4 adventurers. A single Bulette encounter is only really going to be a suitable battle for them between the levels of around 4 to 6. Beyond that, it becomes more of a nuisance than a real threat, at least according to challenge rating calculations. There are ways to plan the Bulette's behaviour to make it incredibly deadly beyond that level range, but we'll get to that later. An alternative here could be to use the Bulette as a chaotic third element in a different encounter. Maybe the party are fighting some bandits, and that noise attracts a nearby Bulette who is hostile to both groups. Maybe the party and the bandits make a temporary truce, or maybe each group tries to direct the Bulette towards the other. There are some interesting things you could do with this concept. Anyway, back to the stat block. The Bulette is fast, not just on foot with a 40 feet speed, but also a whopping 40 feet burrowing speed as well. That is a lot. When you compare the Bulette to similar burrowing monstrosities like the Ankeg or the Umber Hulk, they generally walk faster than they can dig, but the Bulette is just as good at both. This movement speed means it's going to be incredibly difficult for any regular humanoid to escape the Bulette once it starts chasing them. Your average farmer or shepherd out in a field does not stand a chance. The Bulette then has proficiency in perception and dark vision and tremor sense, as we'd expect for this kind of creature. This means that it's going to be very good at sensing the presence of nearby prey, and things like invisibility are not going to protect you from tremor sense. An interesting note here on senses though, what it has there with that +6 is not just regular proficiency with perception. If it were the case, it would just be a +3. The Bulette actually has, even though it's not stated, expertise in perception, as that's double its proficiency bonus. That has been added to both its perception checks and its passive perception. Either that or it's a typo in the official stat block, but I'm going to assume that it's expertise. The Bulette has just one trait, and that is Standing Leap, that allows it to jump from standing 15 feet with a high jump or 30 feet with a long jump. For such a big hulking creature, this is a great mobility boost, especially when combined with its already high speed. On actions, it's got a surprisingly hard-hitting bite attack, and then it has its signature ability, Deadly Leap. This lets it jump and land on a group of enemies, dealing decent damage to them and potentially knocking them away and pushing them prone. The only real downside to this action, which is easy to overlook, is that the targets of this attack can choose which saving throw they want to use, either strength or dexterity. For most players, one of those saves is probably going to be decent, so this just gives players a better chance to mitigate some of that damage. But either way, they still take half damage on a successful saving throw. Okay, so given its abilities and its challenge rating of 5, my assessment is that even though the artwork and description present it as quite a tanky creature, it's actually far more of an offensive monster than a defensive one. Its role in combat is as a striker. Its AC and hit points are good, but it's that damage dealing potential that is pushing it up to a challenge rating 5. So a single Bulette encounter against a group of 4 players at level 5 is going to be pretty swingy. Either the Bulette gets a good leap in when the party are bunched up, dealing maybe around 60 damage with a single action. That's assuming half the party fail their saving throws and based on average damage, and it then proceeds to wreck the party over the next 2 or 3 rounds. Or, if the party roll well on initiative, they spread out, kite it with ranged attacks, and then completely take it out of the fight with some kind of charm, fear, or stun effect, probably from a save or suck spell. Something like Hypnotic Pattern will do it. The Bulette has no bonus to its wisdom saving throw, so it's likely to fail any kind of immobilizing spell that's cast on it. That's some of my critique out of the way. Before we move on to battle tactics, if you are enjoying the video so far, please remember to hit that like button and leave a comment. Let me know what monster in the monster manual really let you down. Is there a particular creature that you love the flavour of and the artwork for, but it just doesn't really hit hard enough in combat? Leave me a comment and I'll add that monster to my homebrew list. Okay, on to battle tactics. There is a particular optimal sequence of movement and action that the Bulette can perform that is going to prove most deadly in a fight. It emerges from the ground and leaps 15 feet towards whichever players are in a group nearby, and uses its signature deadly leap action. It then uses whatever movement it has remaining, potentially up to 25 feet, to get back underground. A whole round goes by where the party probably can't actually target or damage the Bulette in any way, as it could be under 5, 10 or more feet of dirt beneath them. They might not even know its actual position if they can't see it anymore. Smarter players will probably use this round to take the ready action and prepare themselves for the next strike. And when the Bulette's turn comes around again, it's rinse and repeat. Rise out of the ground, jump, use deadly leap, and then burrow back down. This fairly simple strategy will seriously mess up any unprepared party, and it will take some creative and tactical thinking by the players to counter it. But that being said, let's remember what the monster manual told us about the Bulette's behaviour. It is a predator and it is after food. So it might just target a single party member, maybe the halfling if there is one, as we know they like the taste. And once that target is unconscious or dead, the Bulette may just drag them off underground and eat them. But equally, we also know that it has no fear when fighting against a larger number of foes, so it may just fight to the death, whether that is the party's or its own. Unlike the Ankh Egg, which I've covered in a previous video, the Bulette's attack doesn't include an auto-grapple, so it's probably not going to try the whole pop and grab technique I discussed in that video. I'll leave a link to that one at the end if you haven't already seen it. I'm not going to repeat here how deadly burrowing creatures can be once they've grappled a party member, so go check that one out at the end if you're interested. It is my view that burrowing is far more dangerous on a monster than flying in 90% of cases. It really is an underrated movement type. So overall, tactics for the Bulette are fairly straightforward. Use your burrowing speed to seek cover from attacks and other harmful effects, and go for maximum damage. That's going to be deadly leap if 2 or more players are grouped up, or bite attacks against a solo target if they're spread out. And we know that the nature of Bulettes is to not work well with others, even other Bulettes, so there's not much to say in regards to potential battle allies. You could make the case for Bulettes as a monstrous mount option. However, we know from the entry that juvenile Bulettes are incredibly rare, so getting hold of a young Bulette to train and rear seems very, very unlikely. So, where do we go next then? If you want to expand the horizons of the Bulette, we need to either imagine a scenario where they would work in a group of other creatures, or with multiple Bulettes, potentially breaking away from the lore descriptions of the creature, or we can imagine a more powerful, maybe older and larger Bulette that offers a viable threat as a solo monster at higher levels of play. And that is exactly what I've done. Let's take a look at some homebrew. This is what I've called the Century Bulette, a CR16 legendary monster. Calling on its apparent origins as a hybrid of armadillos and snapping turtles, I've imagined a very long-lived Bulette over 100 years old, which has grown in both its strength and its hunger. Let's run through some of the key changes and improvements that I've made. This bulette is huge in size, has a big pool of hit points to reflect this, and has an increased armor class of 20. I've also made it even faster with both 50 feet for its walking speed and for its burrowing speed. To reflect its long life and hardy build, I've given it proficiency with Constitution saving throws, and we've maintained that expertise in perception, which is even more useful now that it's a higher challenge rating creature and has a higher proficiency bonus. The distance of its standing leap trait has been increased in line with its size and speed, and it now has 3 legendary resistances to use. These really are important here if you want this version of the bulette to have some staying power at higher levels. Without this, it's still going to fall victim to that single hypnotic pattern or banishment that could take it out of the battle with one action, so use those resistances when you really need them. Its bite attack and signature deadly leap actions are a bit stronger in this version, and I've also taken some inspiration of how the bulette was presented in Baldur's Gate 3. If you've not played the game, this isn't really much of a spoiler, but the bulette that you do encounter in Baldur's Gate has this sort of acid spitting ability, which of course it doesn't have in the monster manual, but for a bit of extra flavour I've added it in here. It's effectively a short range acid equivalent to the fireball spell. It gives the bulette a ranged attack option, although it often isn't going to need that because of its high mobility. For legendary actions, I've given it a simple move action. At a glance you might not think much of this, but on a creature with a 50-foot burrowing speed this is pretty powerful. Then I've also given it a bite attack that costs 2 legendary actions, which has an auto grapple on a hit. Together, these actions allow the bulette to grab an enemy and drag them deep underground, potentially in one round of combat. This massively ups the deadliness of this monster and contributes towards that high challenge rating. And I've left it there for this one. The bulette, as it is in the monster manual, is a relatively simple monster, so I didn't want to go over the top with this version. It's fairly straightforward as far as legendary creatures go, but it's definitely a formidable foe in the hands of the right dungeon master. If I was going to take this monster concept even further, I'd probably give it the siege monster trait, and potentially a swallow action as a follow-up to a bite attack. But as it stands, I think the Century Bulette is pretty good as is. Last point before we finish up, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's been watching the channel so far. At the time of recording, I've just hit 1,000 subscribers, which is far more than I'd ever expected when I set up this channel, which was only about 10 weeks ago. I'm going to keep making monster breakdowns like this, and I'm going to keep sharing homebrew stuff, along with the occasional video on DM and player advice, including a few map making videos sprinkled in here and there. So if that kind of stuff sounds good to you, and you want more of it showing up in your YouTube feed, show some support for the channel, subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment, and a big thank you to those of you who already have. As always, I will leave a link in the description below to this stat block if you want to use it in your own game. That's all for this one. Cheers everyone, I'll see you next time.